Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Public Service Board Select Committee. Apologies for starting slightly later than scheduled, a couple of technical issues. So the first item on the agenda today will be to receive apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Councillors Batruni and Grocott.
We'll then proceed to electing a chair for today's meeting. Can I please have nominations for a chair for today?
Nominate Councillor Pratt, please.
And I would second.
Thank you. So, Councillor Pratt, if you can come and take over the meeting. Just to mention that we have a substitute for Councillor Breakper today, which will be Councillor Smith.
Good morning, everybody, and I think if we could first of all introduce ourselves to those people watching online. I'm Councillor Jane Pratt and I represent Clydach, Llanelli Hill and Gilwyn.
I'm Hazel Eilert, I'm the Scrutiny Manager.
Wendy Barnard, Democratic Services Officer.
Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Governance, Monmouthshire Council.
Chris Rees, Natural Resources Wales.
Councillor Jamie Trahan, Member of Overmanor Ward and Member of this committee.
Councillor Val Smith, Member for Llanfairpwll Ward and substituting for Councillor Blakeborough.
Richard Jones, Performance Manager, Monmouthshire County Council.
Hazel Clatworthy, Sustainability Policy Officer.
Sharon Lloyd, I'm the Communities and Partnerships Manager for Monmouthshire Council.
Thank you all very much indeed. And agenda item number 2 is declarations of interest. We'll take those as and when. And so agenda item number 3 is a public open forum. Do we have anybody from the public with us today? We don't. So we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of January 2019, which are on pages 1 to 6. So
accept, Chair.
You're happy to?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll move those minutes, and I'll sign them as a true and accurate record. So agenda item 5 is progressing the steps in Monmouthshire's wellbeing plan. And Matthew, you're going to lead on this. So if you'd like to address the members.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. If you're happy with this, Chair, I'll just sort of run through the outline of what we're looking to achieve with bringing this item today. And then we have 2 presentations for the committee, one from Chris and coincidentally one from myself. So just to give a bit of context, what we'll look at today is an update of progress reports on some of the key steps within the wellbeing plan, which was approved by the Public Service Board last year. You recall from previous meetings that the PSB has prioritised 6 particular steps. The reason for that being there are 19 steps underpinning the 4 wellbeing objectives within the plan. Clearly 19 steps, even for an extensive sort of breadth of organisations such as we have in the PSB, is quite a significant undertaking. And so the PSB agreed to prioritise issues largely because they were things which either were time critical in terms of the opportunity to move on them, or because they were things which would lay the foundations which would be used by other steps and relevant for other pieces of work. So the steps that have been prioritised are set out in para 4.4 of the covering report. Adverse childhood experiences led by Gwent Police, and as a committee you looked at the adverse childhood experiences work I think in September. The mental health of children and young people, which has been led by a Naira and Bevan Health Board. improving the resilience of ecosystems by working at a larger scale, which is led by Natural Resources Wales, and you'll hear from Chris Rees today. Promoting active citizenship, which is being led by GAVO, the Gwent Association of Voluntary Organisations. And you'll recall at your last meeting you heard from Martin Featherstone along with Owen Wills, who described the work that's happening there. The fifth one is readdressing the supply and mix of housing stock, and you heard from Mark Hand at the last meeting. And the final one is developing technology-led solutions for rural transport, which I have the pleasure of leading, and will give a presentation to update you after Chris has spoken. So just as a sort of reminder of what we're doing with this, think of the ways of working in the Act, the ways of working to define the sustainability principle. Yeah, and that is solutions that look to the long term, solutions which are collaborative in their nature, involving a multiplicity of partners. We're looking for things to be developed which involve a diversity of people. They involve people in our communities. They involve in their development of ideas and their implementation. Solutions under the Act should be preventative, not just to solve problems after they've occurred, but to actually look at how we can prevent those occurring in the first place. The proverbial fence at the top of the cliff rather than the ambulance at the bottom. I think I've missed one out there. I've only done 4. What am I missing? Integration. I think one of the things we're looking to achieve there is these are not just done in isolation, but you look at how the different well-being objectives can impact on each other. So, for example, when I'm talking around sort of transport later on, you were thinking around what is the impact of that in terms of an aging population, in terms of a thriving and economic county. So both our sort of local context, but also the 7 national objectives. And that's an opportunity as well to highlight potentially some of the conflicts that may exist between different objectives and steps. Now, one of the other things to sort of bring your attention to, and it's something I know that we will be looking, and Hazel will be looking to arrange some training on in future. The Future Generations Commissioner has recently published a framework for scrutiny. It's only sort of recently come out, so apologies there hasn't been an opportunity to train you and make you familiar with that. It is sort of hyperlinked in the covering report, but just to stress for members, it's something we'll bring forward to you in a bit more detail, and that will help with your questioning and sort of examination of future projects coming forward. So, Chair, I'll pause in case there are any sort of questions in terms of sort of background or context, and if there are none, I'll then sort of hand over to Chris to deliver his presentation.
Thank you very much, Matt, and I think we really welcome today's presentation because I know from attending the climate change meeting with Hazel that this is something that is very dear to a lot of our residents' hearts, and how we're going to be climate ready for the future. Are there any questions from members from the points that Matt has covered so far? Councillor Smith.
Not a question, just a comment, Chairman, that I'm glad to see that the 19 original sort of items have been identified 6 really important issues, and in that way you'll get some integration. With 19 issues, we weren't going to get anywhere, so I welcome that. Gives a bit more clarity, I think. So, the scrutiny report, where has that come from, please, Matt? Who published that one?
Is that the one I mentioned?
Just mentioned now.
Yes, it was from the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner, Sophie Howe. And I understand it, and Hazel can correct me if I'm wrong here, scrutiny managers around Wales were also involved in contributing to that. And it's begun to develop some particular sort of questioning strategies and hierarchies that could be useful.
No, I actually had the opportunity of looking at that yesterday with the Fire Authority, and it did provoke some good conversations, actually.
Councillor Trahan, do you have any questions for Matt at all? No. Can I just ask, I mean, I'm really pleased to hear that there's going to be some training, because I think that would be really beneficial. But is there going to be, I notice one of the attachments is a letter to our Chief Executive saying that there's support for public service boards. Is there going to be some support for training, financial support?
We don't have any particular support for training. We'll talk around that item a little later on, but I understand it's absolutely sort of important in terms of this context. There are some very specific criteria around how the grant funding from Welsh Government can be used. So it's effectively £74,000 for Gwent as a whole, and there are some quite strict criteria. It has to be used for collaborative projects around well-being assessments and development of well-being plans and reporting. So, you know, anything we need to do in terms of training for this, we will have to look to resource locally. But again, if a need is identified, that's something we'll look to pick up with John and the local democracy teams in terms of sort of broader budgets.
Thank you. Well, unless there are any other questions, I would like to invite Chris to present to members. And thank you very much indeed for coming along today, Chris. It's great to see you. And, you know, this is something that is so important to us. We live in a beautiful area. We've got some of the nicest countryside in Wales, and we're very lucky. But, you know, we really have to make sure that we look after it and preserve it and protect it for the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Natural Resources Wales. Thank you for the invite. I am keen to represent Natural Resources Wales in relation to our work, not just in association with the Public Service Board, but obviously as an organisation which is in transition really to deliver what it is that Welsh Government are asking of us. I thought I would begin really by setting out some of the broader ways in which the organisation has to change and is changing, with the very strong foundation of the legislation that has been passed in Wales, and a unique opportunity for us to build from that foundation to an organisation where we can deliver better for a whole host of issues within Wales. Sustainable management of natural resources is about managing Wales's natural resources in a joined-up way that delivers real and better outcomes for the environment, people, the economy and our communities. And as I said, the legislation that's been passed gives us the opportunity to do that. It also places on us a duty in that it introduces an enhanced biodiversity and resilience of ecosystems duty, as Section 6 of the Environment Wales Act 2016. And we seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity through whatever it is that we are doing to promote resilience of ecosystems. The legislation tells us that resilience includes diversity, connectivity, scale, condition and adaptability. And to comply with Section 6 duty, public authorities in Wales should embed the consideration of biodiversity and ecosystems into every part of their thinking in relation to preparing or publishing plans, strategies, in any aspect of the work that they do.
Sorry, Matt, yes.
I'm just checking, so there's quite a bit of detail on these slides, whether members can see it and whether it might be better to switch to planning mode on the large screen.
Yes, I think that would be an excellent idea.
Also, members, we have to pause for a moment.
Yeah.
So actually, we've got a...
Yeah. Yes, I mean, obviously they're really good slides, and I think it might be helpful if they were. So I'll move out the way. We'll just pause for a moment whilst we sort out the technicality.
Members, we're just a little concerned if we switch to planning mode, it will knock out the live stream. So what we'll do, if you're happy with this, we'll just pause for a couple of minutes and print out copies of the slides so you can look at them and not miss any of the detail. So apologies for anyone listening on the live stream for the delay where we just make a couple of administrative arrangements.
Is it also possible that this presentation could be circulated to those that aren't here with us today? we'll be able to restart very shortly. We're just waiting for the presentation. Thank you very much, Matt. Has everybody got copies of the slides? So if you can just confirm which slide we're on at the moment.
We're on slide 3.
So slide number 3.
Okay. So as I was saying, in order to comply with Section 6 duty of the Environment Wales Act, public authorities in Wales should embed the consideration of biodiversity and ecosystems into their early thinking when it comes to business planning, policies, plans, programmes and projects. And I think that's very much our role as NRW within a public service board arena, is to ensure that that thinking is delivered whilst we are developing that early thinking. Slide number 4. So how do we in NRW and our... Bear with me. Get it back for me. That's it. So how do we in NRW and our partners achieve the objectives of sustainable management and natural resources? Wales is at the forefront of sustainable development legislation, like I just said. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the Environment Act set out the principles that underpin the ways in which we need to work together with public service boards. And you'll see them there in relation to the Act: adaptive management, scale, collaboration and engagement, public participation, evidence, multiple benefits, that's such an important one, thinking for the long term and preventative action, and building resilience. So in our discussions as an organisation, in relation to what it is that we are setting out to achieve, we have to have consideration to all of these principles, the sustainable development principles, to ensure that we are delivering against the Act when we carry out our functions. Slide number 5. The National Natural Resource Policy sets out 3 national priorities for us. delivering nature-based solutions, increasing renewable energy and resource efficiency, and taking a place-based approach. And I'll explain what that means in a little bit more detail shortly. The purpose of area statements is to facilitate and implement every element of the policies that have been developed within the Act itself. And touching on area statements, which is very much more of an underpinning mechanism for our role in enabling others to work in a way that we wish to see them working, and sets out some of the discussions that we have at Programme Board, which then supports the Public Service Board here in Monmouthshire. The area statements is going to contain a considerable amount of information for us to work on. And so we, as NRW, will, in collaboration with others, prepare and publish area statements, which will facilitate the implementation of the policies. And the area statements will be an important evidence base for bodies operating within an area, as they will include information on the natural resources and the priorities, risks and opportunities within that actual place. And our purpose is to pursue the sustainable management of natural resources and apply the supporting principles which I spoke about just now. So we're on to slide 6, and that sets out there the 7 area statements covering Wales, with an extra one which covers the marine area. And we will take a place-based approach to managing the environment within these places, ensuring that they will be tailored to our experiences on the ground. And as such, we are joined up across those places. For example, we are working with national stakeholders who have an interest in all areas at a Wales-wide scale. So it's important that we don't just focus on place, but we're mindful of that bigger picture as well. Slide 7. Area statements. They will explain specifically why the statement has been prepared in the first place. Why is it that within that area we need to develop an area statement? It'll describe the natural resources in that area and the benefits derived from those natural resources, and also highlight the priorities, risks, and opportunities that need to be addressed. So it's a collective approach to understanding what the issues are, who we need to work with, and more importantly, how we can deliver benefits, not just for ourselves, but for future generations as well. Slide 8 just goes through some of the mechanisms that the area statement process will follow to allow us to look at how we can coordinate our work to build resilience of ecosystems and enhance the well-being benefits they provide. So this is a snapshot of a number of very well-developed policies, plans, local development initiatives, and it looks at cross-cutting the elements within those plans and strategies to ensure that we are delivering from a public sector corporate approach. And we are already highlighting a number of themes that we are currently working on, which will bring about the betterment of a collective approach to delivering our requirements within the Act itself. Procurement for one, corporate planning, performance management, workforce planning. So it's just looking at all of those elements of our own work and our stakeholders, our partners' work, and just looking at where we can have multiple benefit in relation to working together. So we have area statement practitioners who are responsible for coordinating meaningful involvement in the area statement process. And within the related field of the Wellbeing Future Generations Act implementation, there are a number of national mechanisms that those practitioners are looking at to deliver on what it is that we're asked to achieve. Slide 9 shows the broad timeline and in development with internal specialists, the PSB practitioners coming out to the internal business, if you like, of NRW, and external partners and stakeholders. The area statement process will identify and scope out those priorities, risks and opportunities for the sustainable management of natural resources. And that is all based on those principles of sustainable management that I mentioned just earlier on. So it's throwing a net around what it is that we need to include in developing very much a joined-up approach to enabling others to deliver our duties. Slide 10 just sets out now in more detail where we're at and the emerging themes that have been developed by us that we believe need to be looked at and built upon. And the Gwent Green Grid, which identifies opportunities for improving the health and ecological connectivity of our protected areas within the wider landscape of the natural and built environment. Climate Ready Gwent, identifying landscape scale opportunities for climate adaptation and mitigation using an ecosystems approach. Healthy and Active, working with the primary and social care system to develop and deliver services and interventions that are focused on using the natural environment. And Ways of Working, investing in and strengthening place-based connections. Those area statements really give us an opportunity to really get to the heart of who it is that we should be working with, and more importantly, what it is that we are going to be delivering for the betterment of that area place, and of course collectively for the whole of Wales. Slide 11 just goes into a little bit of detail in relation to where we're at. And as I said, there are a number of practitioners working quite hard behind the scenes in developing this for us. And as I said just earlier on, it is important that we understand what is special and significant about each ecosystem. What is the resilience of that ecosystem now, and how that ecosystem is currently managed. And there will be opportunities for us to understand where we want to go from here to ensure that everything that we're looking at is improved for future generations. Slide 12 then just highlights the more local step within the wellbeing plan that NRW are responsible for. And the wellbeing objective is to protect and enhance the resilience of our natural environment whilst mitigating and adapting to the impact of climate change. And the step is that we should improve the resilience of ecosystems by working at a larger scale, which is landscape, to manage biodiversity and maximise benefits. And the example there is natural flood risk management. So for over 6 months now, we have been working with the area of outstanding natural beauty within the Wye Valley, the lower Wye Valley in particular. And we've identified a number of areas where we believe natural flood risk management techniques will be beneficial for a whole host of aspects. And this ranges from reducing flooding to property. It encompasses better land management practices. It demonstrates how we can increase biodiversity opportunity from implementing those measures. And also surface water as well, in terms of slowing that flow within those streams, slowing it to a pace that is more mindful of the property and also the footpaths and roads and a whole host of other things that are lower downstream. So small intervention at the upper reaches of these streams would be very, very beneficial, in our opinion, in relation to mitigating for the effects of climate change, but more so natural flood risk management. And we're working very closely with a number of partners to deliver that over the next couple of years. There's also regional priorities, a Gwent-wide approach, which is enabling the natural resources and well-being across South East Wales. The Gwent Green Grid Partnership will form an overarching policy framework and partnership of key organisations. And the proposal, which has received funding, will deliver a consistent approach to the green infrastructure management across Gwent and enable strategic planning, including influencing local development plans, ecosystem service assessments, planning, and so on. So whilst we touched on the more local elements of work that is probably closer to what I'm involved with, we must not lose sight of the fact that progress is being made on a regional basis as well, which includes Monmouthshire in a big way, and also includes the opportunity to really get our partners and ourselves working in a collaborative way. And in March this year, the Gwent Green Grid Partnership received confirmation that their joint bid to the Enabling Natural Resources and Wellbeing in Wales Welsh Government grant stream had been successful to a total value of 2.2 million. So there's progress there quite quickly. It's quite fast-paced, but we are working to develop a common evidence base which will inform the delivery outputs that are within the NRAW bid. And then slide 15 finishes with climate change mitigation and adaptation. And within the bid that I mentioned, consultants have been appointed and are working with specific communities in Monmouthshire in particular, that represent several different climate risks that are apparent. And workshops have taken place, again, speaking to the people from their lived experiences, the experiences that they have from living in those areas for many, many years. We need to understand what those experiences tell us, and work together to halt any decline. And in the workshops that have taken place thus far, there's certainly quite a lot of work to do in relation to surface water flooding, wind damage from buildings, fallen trees, soil loss from farmland causing pollution, and so on and so forth. So that's probably as far as I'll take you today in relation to just hopefully giving you a flavour of the national, regional and local work that NRW are involved with, but more importantly, how we as a changing organisation are enabling others to deliver what it is that we are setting out to achieve in terms of the sustainable management of our natural resources.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that excellent presentation and for providing these slides. And this is such a massive piece of work. And I know today we have got, not only are we county councillors, but we're I think the three of us that are here are also community councillors and town councils. So we've got a really good overview of how this all is going to join up together. I found that fascinating, and I know I've got lots of questions myself, but I would like to ask members and obviously involve officers as well in this discussion. So first of all, can I take questions from members? Councillor Smith?
Right, going back, talking about covering Wales totally and joining them, there used to be a setup called EPAC, the Environmental Protection Action Committee. That disappeared some years ago, but it was a very good overarching scheme, I felt, so that was one thing. You're working on your development plans. Presumably you're liaising closely with Monmouthshire, who are also undertaking their local development plan. So how does that work?
That's the benefit, I think, of public service boards being set up in relation to, I mentioned section 6, the duty that is upon us to consider in our early thinking the principles of sustainable management. So you're absolutely right, a very important point you make, and one that we are ensuring that we are delivering in the forums that we are meeting on from a programme board perspective, which then feeds up to the public service board. So very much key to the delivery of the Act is the fact that we need to talk together and to ensure that we are aware of exactly what it is that we're seeking out to achieve.
How are you actually engaging with the public? I know you have, within the community, we know there are individuals who are very keen and interested and knowledgeable about climatic conditions and the environment. What about the general public, the greater 90% perhaps? How do you contact them? How do you get their views and get their experiences? Because later on you made reference to addressing issues that the public have. How do you get those fed into Resources Wales, please?
Yes, social media is very, very important these days in communicating our work to our customers, our stakeholders, and the general public. But in the context of our area statements, for example, we will be going out to those people within those focused areas and contacting them and saying, look, come along, tell us, like we have done with the Climate Ready Gwent initiative in Monmouth. We've said to the people of Monmouth, come and meet us here, tell us how it is, what is important from your perspective in relation to the issues that you've got, and then collectively we will look at that in the broader context. So we're making every effort really to not only develop ourselves to be in a position that can provide the evidence, we are also asking alternative views on our evidence from the lived experience.
Carry on. I think I attended the Climate Ready meeting last week. Yes, it was interesting, it was good, but the attendance was poor in my estimation. How are you going to publicise these things and getting people on board? It was a good evening so far as I was concerned. I think I went off on a tangent, but it doesn't matter. It was a good evening. You had some individuals there, but not the numbers that you require to do the work that you want to do. So there's a tremendous reliance on social media, but it means people have got to go looking for you. I personally think it's better to go out looking for the people, and your meeting perhaps might have attracted some more attention with a simple old thing like an A-board outside which announced that there was going to be a meeting. So how otherwise, other than your social media, are you going to get the public in?
Sure, and I think I think one of the ways we can do that is by working with our partners, because it isn't, we don't know those networks within Monmouth, for example. We're not aware of how best to communicate with those people. So I would say that by ensuring that the evidence is there from our perspective in relation to what it is that we need to be talking about, we then work with partners to get the message out as best we can. And I think taking your point about promoting it a little bit better within the town, yeah, absolutely, let's do that next time. But really, we rely on those people who live in that area, and we want to work with those people to ensure that we get those messages out about an area statement discussion is happening at this time, and there'll be many groups within Monmouthshire that would need to be contacted within our sort of approach to how we deal with getting that message out there.
Thank you. Can I just bring in Sharon Lloyd, Communities and Partnerships Manager, on this point, because I think this is absolutely key, and I think it's a very valid point that you've raised, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. It's just really to emphasise what Chris is saying there around the community engagement side of it. And as a team, you might know some of the officers in our team, but they are each area based across the county, and part of the work that we do is to support the PSB leads in terms of the steps that they're taking forward, but how we can take those priorities out into the community and look at what the community response is to that as well. So it's kind of part of our role as a team is to look at the ground up, if you like. So how does this impact communities, what matters to the community, and how do they want to play a role in helping us to solve some of the challenges that we have. We're in the process at the moment of doing an engagement across the whole county as a team. We've been in Monmouth for the last week, Usk, we've been in previously as well, and we're moving into the other areas of Abergavenny, Caldicot and Chepstow in the coming weeks ahead. And I know from doing some of the engagement with my colleagues at the moment, some of the things that people are talking about are things like litter and having more bins and how they protect the environment that they live in, which was quite surprising to us, I think, really, to when we've gone out and spoken to the community, that they actually talk in that way quite proactively. So we're trying very much to marry up how we engage the community in some of the work that the PSB is trying to drive forward, and leads such as Chris at the moment. So it's not a perfect science yet, but we are working through that to make sure that the voice comes through the community in some of this work as it goes forward.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Councillor Smith, did you want to come back on that at all?
Probably. Sorry, Sharon. I'm a right pain, I know. The Usk meeting, I was just looking back to, that actually coincided with something else. But again, the only reason I picked it up, no, perhaps I haven't missed it yet, was the fact that it was on the email. It was the technology. People don't go looking for us. You've got to sell it. And we don't sell. We hold meetings quietly behind doors. There's no advert outside that says, come and meet Monmouthshire County Council, have a cup of coffee and discuss something like that. We might draw people in. We get the same individuals who are concerned turning up to the meetings, but we need the other people to also participate to really establish what problems are. So I do know you're working hard, and I'm not trying to undermine you, but we've got to have a slightly different approach to getting the community involved. Because interestingly, you see, this morning talking about, you reference to slowing down water. I witnessed sort of a great slab of tarmac going down over what was previously a porous surface, and I know precisely what will happen. It will flood down that nicely sloping driveway, and it will flood onto the roads where, regrettably, we don't keep our drains clear, and we don't keep the gullies clear, and we have a problem at the bottom of the road. So it's, yes, that's a digression, I know, but it all ties in. We need everybody in, and we've got to advertise our presence and not be supremely confident that people looked for us. They don't. They come across us by accident at times, I think. Sorry.
I think that's so true, and I I would like to add on to that, Councillor Smith, that I think we've got to make it relevant to our communities, because this is all very conceptual, but it needs to be put into simple language. If you ask people where I live, on Llanelli Hill, about the Clydach Gorge and all the issues that we have around there, and people are really passionate about their local area, they want to get involved and they want to contribute, but I don't think we're going to get across to them with these very dry topics, which are really actually quite difficult for people to comprehend. It needs to be talking about their local area and the future and what they want to see for their children and grandchildren. Because every day I drive past a waterfall, and I was on a course last year with a lady who was a director of one of the Scottish energy boards. And I was discussing harnessing the energy of the water around where I live. And this type of thing, you know, these are the conversations that we should be having. And we don't seem to be having them at the moment. So, you know, I think it's really making it relevant. And I really look forward to these meetings that we're having. Don't forget us in North Monmouthshire, will you, up at the Clydach Gorge. Because I would really like to see things like waterfalls. You know, I don't know whether I'm, you know, certainly this colleague from the Scottish Energy Board, she said, Jane, you could really be doing some interesting things there and it would really benefit the local community. So I think there's some good ideas. Any other questions from you, Councillor Smith? Or have you... Councillor Treherne?
The only thing I will say is I got different feeling in my ward. People are interested, but they don't want to be part of it. They just say, well, I voted for you, so I'll leave that to you. Yeah. So they do have an interest, but getting them actually active with that is the bigger problem, I feel. How we can get that, maybe this isn't the forum for it, I don't know, but that's the issue I have.
May I? I think you Councillor Smith and Councillor Tran, you've all made valid points there, and I think one of the ways that I feel will benefit is when we are able to demonstrate achievement in relation to working differently as a collective, and once we have that ability to demonstrate that, and also backed up by some of the actions that are as a result of a public service board working together to deliver for the betterment of the environment, for example, it is then that we will be able to build upon that process to hopefully disseminate that message to a wider number of people who, you know, maybe to address the, okay, well, you've been appointed, it's up to you. That's fair enough, but it doesn't really, it doesn't really deliver on what it is that we're asking the people to get involved with. And I think we need to really pick up on what you've mentioned today, and I'll take it away as an action point for sure to talk to our PSB practitioners. And for them to consider how we take this forward.
Thank you. With the climate change, because climate change it's on everybody's mind apart from Brexit. So climate change is one of the biggest things on people's minds. So with your bit for climate change, what are you proposing to do to prevent catastrophes from climate change that can get people active, if you like, then?
So we have a very serious role to play in protecting people from flooding, from their properties flooding, which is risk of life. That is a major department within our organisation, which I just leave it to them. They're the big boys that deal with those high impact flooding events. But from a softer approach, and one that might be something that communities can get involved with because of the multiple benefits, is surface water flooding, and getting the community to understand or play their part in, okay, probably not going to reduce the risk of flooding to major properties, but nevertheless will get them out in the open to understand how water works and to work with other partners that they may not have even met before to play their bit in mitigating for the effects of climate change. And if that involves better land management practices, more opportunities to plant trees, for example, that is the type of approach that we can bring together as a way of demonstrating the benefits of public service boards working together.
Councillor Smith?
Wales is very interesting, isn't it? I mean, you've got the whole thing. The value of that body that used to meet those years ago, the EPAC, was an understanding and appreciation that the areas of the South Wales valleys are very different to Mid Wales, to West Wales, whatever. It's not an easy job that Natural Resources Wales have got to do. You made reference to the 2.2 million that you've got for Gwent, and I was rather interested to know exactly what you're doing. You said you had appointed some consultants, and perhaps saw one, but what else are you doing with that money? What is it? Is it ring-fenced in? Obviously ring-fenced to Gwent. It's work that you have to do, so how are you going to spend it, please?
That's a very good question, one that I probably need to brief you on. I am not close to the detail of that, other than giving you a briefing, which I've got here. I'm happy to share that with you, but it sets out a number of criteria in relation to exactly what it is that's going to be spent, how it's going to be spent, and more importantly, the principle around collaborative working with others. So I've got it here and happy to share it with you. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, and I think that we would all be very interested to know what your priorities are using that funding.
Chairman, it comes back to looking at Gwent. It's very different on the west of Gwent to the east of Gwent, and there are times when Monmouth feels a little left out of things in not Natural Resources Wales, but other issues. We feel a bit forlorn. Land management is very important, even the way you plough can really have a terrific impact on things. So, no, thank you. Look forward to getting that information.
If I can be indulgent and ask some questions of my own. I'm interested, you have a slide about Brexit post-cap, and I'm interested to know what the impact is going to be of the loss of EU funding, because obviously Wales has been a beneficiary of. We've had far more from the EU really than, and we're going to lose this money. So, are you confident that you're going to have the resources moving forward to deliver everything? And also, I'm interested in our ability to produce food, because I've been talking to quite a few farmers recently, and I was talking to one very well-known local farmer who, incidentally, has sat on the flood management board for many, many years, and talking about the whole problems that we're facing at the moment and our ability to produce food. So, are we in a good place if we have to actually, produce more food ourselves? Obviously, we can't produce oranges and lemons, but looking back to the last war, when as a country we had to produce our own food, but things have obviously changed enormously since then. And the other thing I'm interested in is how much input do you have? I mean, I've had one of the biggest road projects going through my ward recently, and we had a terrible situation recently with flooding of properties at Danicoid Bungalows in Clydach, and the culvert just wasn't capable of coping with the amount of water that was coming off the mountain. So how much, it could have been far worse than it actually was, but it was bad enough. It was horrendous for those people and very frightening. So how much input do you have on these big road projects to prevent these catastrophes from happening? And the other area I'm interested in is housing and building on the floodplain, which is, we're under enormous pressure to build houses. And I know that, places, we are looking to build houses on places that perhaps in the past, you know, and how are we going to ensure that those properties don't flood?
Thank you. In relation to Brexit, again, it would be difficult for me to comment on the broad approach that we are facing in relation to leaving the European Union. Yes, I concur with you in that we or our partners have also received, European funding, which has been put into good use over the many years for increasing the habitat. Improving the habitat for our fish species, for example, and how we work with farmers to realise better land management practices. I think it's a very, very fast-paced developing situation, and one that I would probably, the question is a question to be asked for a public service board in its entirety, and to understand, okay, if we don't have that influx of money coming in, how do we develop and also deliver on some of the other aspects of your questions in relation to feeding the nation, in relation to farming and opportunities of alternative management of our land. I mentioned earlier on in my presentation about assets. It's understanding the shared assets that we've got collectively as a public service board and looking at alternative measures in managing the assets that we've got, such as farms. And flooding of properties, I was aware of the situation on the bypass on the A465, which is the A465, isn't it? Bypass. I was aware of that, although I wasn't the duty tactical manager at the time. But as a duty tactical manager, I do get the communications and the situational reports coming through. And yet again, we're faced with a unique freak incident that we are seeing more and more of these days. But we don't take things like that lightly, and I know a lot of work has gone on with colleagues to ensure that as far as reasonably practicable, that never happens again. And we are quite robust in setting out the consequences of not abiding by good pollution prevention measures. And we have a very close relationship with the developers there that are working on the road. And I would say that the relationship is at a stage where if something goes wrong there, we're aware quite quickly, and we can deploy our resources to ensure that we that we stop it as fast as we can, really.
And housing, building on floodplain?
Housing, we, as you know, are a statutory consultee, so I mentioned again in my presentation about the early development and the early thinking conversations that we should be having when proposals like this come into the planning system. And I think we need to do a lot more work in relation to having that conversation, that understanding of collectively what are the benefits, of course, if there are any, but more importantly, to ensure that we are bringing in the legislation that is there to underpin all of our decisions in that respect.
Thank you very much. Are there any other? Councillor Smith.
Yeah, not a question, just a comment that some years ago, Natural Resources Wales was certainly very, very involved in the right decision being made on housing not being permitted, a big housing development. It was actually in our local development plan, and pointing out the foolhardiness, I felt profound sympathy for your colleague. He withstood an awful battering at that inquiry, but it was good. Can I ask another one, Chairman? Just what sort of working relationship, are you consulted often by the fire authority? How close is the relationship with the fire authority?
Well, they're a member of the Public Service Board, and we consult with them on a regular basis, especially in relation to how we deploy or how we tackle incidents that they go to and have to put out fires using large quantities of water, and therefore we have. We are a Category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act, and with that comes a lot of sharing of ideas, knowledge, sharing, and maintaining skills and capabilities really. And NRW have a unit that we sponsor that can be deployed for any pollution situation where we want the Fire and Rescue Service to come in and use their unit. It's fully kitted out. It's not quite a fire engine, but it's close to it. But it's got very much the kit needed to deal with oil spillages or things of that nature that we encounter on a regular basis.
I'm probably thinking as well of the fires, because that's a very big issue in some valleys, and different strategy being taken, cutting through things, which I just wondered if they consulted with you.
Yes, we do consult with them, and from a technical, we're all also involved in the incident network of people that the police, the fire and rescue, ourselves. We're involved in that network of people that regularly meet to train together and to ensure that we are resilient and ready for those challenges that may be faced, that we may face in the future. And we have some good training to good effect there.
Any other questions from members? Could I ask officers sat at the back if they wanted to contribute in any way or ask any questions whilst we've got Chris here? No? I would just like to also ask you, Chris, you mentioned these area practitioners, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, I've been a councillor here for 2 years and I was aware of Natural Resources Wales, but I think really, I don't know how many resources you've got yourselves, but you need to be a lot more proactive in actually engaging with locally elected members and with community councils. I mean, my little community council, we're currently putting our place plan together. We've had an engagement with all the different communities about what they want to see in the area. And, it would have been really nice if we'd have had a bit of engagement from Natural Resources Wales at that planning stage, which we didn't have. Obviously, I now know who my Holly, I'm sort of touch base with her. But, do you have sort of area reps that can actually go and meet local community councils so that it's all joined up together? Because I think if one thing that we're actually learning from this Public Service Board is how this is all going to work together. And, as elected members, we're really keen that our residents do get their input. And, I think that's only going to happen if we see a bit more of Natural Resources Wales out in the field and on the ground. I don't know what you feel about that.
Mixed feelings there. We have to be mindful of the resources that we've got, and we can't be everywhere. And dealing with things by day and then supporting networks by night. It is difficult. We do have limited resources, but where there's a need, and I can think of a number of situations where we've had an accumulation of issues that are related to one subject. That we need to address, and we need to serve the communities that are concerned. And where that is the case, we will make every effort to attend. I'm glad my colleague has contacted you. I think we need to build that relationship as well. And I'm committed to that. But, it needs to be quite a there needs to be quite a number of issues that need to be addressed for us to deploy the resources to it. However, I really do believe that the area statement process will get to grips with the rightful concerns that you've raised there. It will allow us to connect better with those people. I really do believe that. Whereas, previously, my area would have been the whole of South East or the whole of Mid Wales when I was working up there, and also North Wales. I worked all over Wales, but my area now is almost reducing to a place where we can have those networks of people that we can connect with on a regular basis, because they'll be those people that we need to involve in delivering the area statement process.
Thank you very much. And my personal message to Welsh Government would be that, the work that you do is so vital to our areas in every aspect. And I know that when I contacted somebody from Natural Resources Wales, when we were going to clean out the Clydach Gorge with the Caving Club, removing 2 tons of waste last November, he said to me, "I'm really pleased that you're doing this, Jane, because quite frankly, I haven't got the manpower to come and do it." And I think, we've got something like the Clydach Gorge, which is one of the oldest beech forests in Europe, and such a valuable place. And yet he admitted to me quite openly that we didn't have the resources to do what was really required there. So, that is my message. And I think that we know from our meetings and from the work that Hazel's doing with climate change, that this is a really important top of mind issue for our residents. And this meeting this morning and your presentation, I think, has really put into context for us the challenges that you're facing and also the ones that we're facing as a community. And I hope that we can all work together, to ensure that the future under the Wellbeing Act is going to be, a good one for future generations. So unless there's any other questions, I would like to thank you for coming along today. I know your time is very valuable, but it's been a very interesting presentation, and also for the officers for coming and attending as well. So thank you very much indeed.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much.
Okay, fine. So we'll now move on to the next aspect of Monmouthshire's Wellbeing Plan, which is the transport issue, which I think, is that correct, Matt? And you're presenting on that.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thanks members for the opportunity to talk about this step. Just by coincidence, someone you see so frequently at this committee regarding work with the Public Service Board, also responsible for this step. So just to remind you, the step I'm going to be talking about today is developing new technologies for improving rural transport. Just to go back a little bit and remind you of the context. The need for this came from the wellbeing assessment, where we looked at the 5 geographical areas of the county, attended a myriad of events, talked to 1,400 people, went out into schools, gathered a huge amount of data and postcards, I should say, and asked people what mattered to them. And that was about getting that true understanding of the picture of well-being in Monmouthshire, what it's like now, and what the futures people aspire to for themselves, their children, their grandchildren. So really thinking longer term as the Future Generations Act expects us to do, and as we all want to do. So that enabled us to identify the challenges and opportunities which have fed into the well-being assessment and then led to the setting of the well-being objectives by the Public Service Board. So sort of ancient history over as it were, but just to sort of set in context what each of the partners are doing at the moment. And similar to what Chris has run through, but just to help you sort of think of the structure of what you'll see over the next couple of slides. What's the problem, or what's the opportunity that we're facing as a public service board? Why is it an issue? What's the evidence that says this is a problem? What can we do about it? And actually, that includes sort of looking globally, looking outwards at what some of the best practitioners in the world may be doing around this, and thinking differently about some of these challenges. Because we know if we were dealing with these things in the right way, they wouldn't have come through as evidence in the wellbeing assessment in the first place. And then, what sort of ambition will that give to us? What will it look like if we get this right? And then focusing on actions, using that to say, what is it that we're doing at the moment? And is it the right thing? Do we need to continue what we're currently doing? Or do we need to adjust or adapt it in light of what we're trying to achieve? And then also thinking around what's the new work that we'll need to develop to deliver this step. And then finally, in terms of that side, and why I'm before you today, what's the progress so far? So a reminder of the particular sort of challenge, opportunity and step I'm talking about today. As elected members representing wards in Monmouthshire, this comes as no surprise to you. It's something that you frequently talk about in this chamber. But limited public transport, particularly in rural areas, makes it really hard for people to access jobs, services and facilities. And as a reminder, one of the pieces of evidence we saw in that wellbeing assessment was that the journey time from the heart of Monmouthshire to some of our facilities like leisure centres, if you are reliant on public transport, can be over 2 hours. I think it was something like 2 hours, 14 minutes from some communities. Big challenges for older people, for people returning to work, perhaps after starting a family, and also for young people trying to access the job market. We know that this has been exacerbated by rising fuel prices. We're overly dependent on private cars. And if you might have a driving licence, but you're a younger person, if you're 17 or 18, you can spend sort of £2,500 trying to insure that car. A big challenge for young people trying to access employment. But we know there are also big opportunities through the city deal for potential investments. If they meet criteria and could be agreed by the regional cabinet. But also things like advances in technology, things like automated vehicles. Now that may feel a long way off at the moment, but we all see these articles in the news. And this act is requiring us to look really long term, and that's generationally, that's up to 25 years ahead. And where some of these things are hitting cities first of all, we have to consider that as these develop, some of these technologies may become applicable for rural communities such as ours. And there's a whole spectrum of things out there in terms of technology that could help us on a point. It's not instantly moving to driverless cars and automated vehicles, but we've seen evidence of a lot of interesting practice that we think may have some applicability in Monmouthshire. Why it's an issue, again, I think I probably sort of covered most of this, but one of the things we know as a local authority, we got reducing budgets. There's a lot less money to subsidise traditional transport services. That's subsidy per mile of public transport, not just in Monmouthshire, but it comes under increasing pressure. We know, as I've mentioned, that people are heavily dependent on private cars, and that has cost both financially and environmentally. We know we have pollution hotspots in Monmouthshire, and we know that some of that has been exacerbated by, or would anticipate some exacerbation, for example, by more people driving with a reduction of the bridge tolls. We know, for example, that Hardwick Hill in Chepstow is really challenging in terms of both pollution and congestion. And in Monmouthshire, we have an ageing population, and that can really limit people's mobility. Sometimes long-term conditions and frailty can limit people's ability to drive, and with that over-dependence on private cars, it can exacerbate isolation and loneliness, which ultimately leads to increased health and social care costs. So the objective, the particular objective this is aligned to is developing opportunities for communities and businesses to be part of an economically thriving and well-connected county. So that's one of the 4 steps, or sorry, the 4 well-being objectives in the PSB's plan. And the particular step, one of the 19 and one of the 6 we prioritise is developing new technologies for improving rural transport. So one of the things I've sort of want to highlight in terms of integration is, although that's predominantly aligned to that economically thriving and well-connected county, it comes as no surprise that transport enables people to be connected. There are also important links to other areas, giving people the best possible start in life. The ability of families to move around the county, of mums and children and fathers to be able to access the many things our county has to remain active. In terms of its impact on the natural environment, because of the pollution costs of private cars and congestion and some of the issues we see. And the potential impact in terms of the challenge of demographic change, with people becoming isolated and lonely, perhaps, if they can no longer get out and about around our county. So although it sits under one objective, it's connected to multiple objectives within the wellbeing plan. So what I'm going to do now is just give you an update of some of the things that have been happening under this step. And what I would say, the importance of what the PSB does is collaborative activity. Some of the things I'm talking about here are happening driven by community groups, driven by voluntary organisations, but they're all things that are making a difference to this goal. And the organisations, for the most part, are represented as members of the Public Service Board. And it's thinking about that sort of challenge. Is this something we can do to make a difference to these projects, thinking through the lens of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act? Before I do, Chair, I'm just conscious, do you want me to sort of pause in case there are any sort of questions in terms of what I've presented so far, or whether yourself...
Yeah, no, thank you, Matt. I think it'd be a good, because there's quite a lot of information here, so I think if we could sort of take any questions from members on what you've covered so far, would that be helpful? Members, Councillor Smith.
Why have we got trackers on the MCC buses? I could see the logic behind the grassroots bus, perhaps, where it was, but is it...
All shall be revealed as I move ahead.
Councillor Trahan, do you have any questions? No. I mean, I'm keen to know about this hydrogen facility, because we certainly saw it when we went to Abergavenny on we did a review of all the public toilets, and we were aware. I have to say, I've never ever seen anybody using, and I was there again on Friday with Dave Jones, I've never seen anybody using that hydrogen facility or the electric charging points, and there's very limited signage and not really enough information about it. So can you just elaborate a little bit more on that hydrogen, the reference you make there to the hydrogen scheme?
Yeah, Chair, well, if I may, what I'll do, if there are no sort of questions on the earlier, I'll just sort of run through some of these and pick them up, because I'm not the expert in these, in a number of these by any stretch, but it's important to give you the context of some of the things that are happening that are contribute to this. So if I may, I'll just start a little earlier. So the starting point on this step was a rural transport study that was commissioned through the RDP. Colleagues Mike Powell led on that. We held it was run by, Mike appointed some external consultants. We had some funding to deliver it. They spoke to transport providers, to users of transport, and also began to look at some of that sort of cutting-edge best practice that's out there, looking at the best things both in the UK and globally that could perhaps be applied to Monmouthshire. And that's really important in the context of this step, because what it helped us to understand and what it helped us to evidence is probably something we knew, that our challenge in Monmouthshire is pretty complex. And actually, there is no easy way to solve that. There are people out there that are doing things that are pretty close. We saw some really interesting practice out in not that we visited this, it would be nice if we had, but Nebraska in the USA. There's some great work happening over in Oxfordshire in terms of using technology to increase people's knowledge of transport options. There's some brilliant schemes happening in Bristol. But none of these, as they stood, are absolutely right to solve the issue in Monmouthshire's context. And just sort of, I'll leave that there because I'll return to that, to that shortly. But effectively, we started with a good evidence base of some of the specific transport challenges in Monmouthshire and some of the best practice elsewhere. So some of the other things happening around here, some of the ongoing actions. We've seen a growth in the community car share scheme run by Bridges. We know there are challenges for any community organisation in terms of the sustainability of their funding. That scheme started in Monmouth. It's now in Abergavenny and has been rolled out to Chepstow and Caldecott. Voluntary run scheme with people using private cars to help people access different services. As a council, we've installed trackers on MCC buses. So to come back to your point, Councillor Smith, that's effectively buses providing public transport. So it could be our fleet that are running any routes, and the grassroots buses as well. And the importance of that is something we know through this research, and it's backed up by research elsewhere, which is that if you look at transport in its entirety, everything that's moving around our county and our region, there is actually quite a lot of capacity in the system, but it's not very well connected. It's very hard to access.
I think the reason I asked that was that it just seems framed on the MCC buses when it's so obviously used elsewhere on other.
Yeah, but previously we didn't have those, and what that's enabled us to gather is far better data on movements of transport in the county to optimise that. And the other thing is it opens up the possibility of things which you see exist in more urban area, far better and live information around where vehicles are and where people can access them. Colleagues in operations, Richard Cope, Roger Hoggins, have secured some £317,000 in grant funding for the grassroots fleet. We've seen a community-led campaign to open the...
With regard to the grassroots bus system, originally it was volunteer drivers. Are we using volunteers all the time, or are we now in a situation where we use volunteers as well as paid drivers?
It's a mix of volunteer and paid drivers. So there are some paid drivers used as part of the service. I think largely where the capacity in terms of their contracts, where they might be running other routes such as school drop-offs at the beginning and end of the day, where there may be capacity then in the day, they can be used for other routes such as the grassroots scheme.
I find that quite difficult actually, Chairman, because the scheme was initially volunteer drivers and we still have volunteers. It's very difficult, I think, to match those two, that somebody's volunteering to do the job, to do the transport, to drive that bus, and somebody else is also driving a similar bus but is being paid. And I think we've got to find a way of making that, I say clear, making it very fair, Chairman. There is so much you can expect from volunteers, and I certainly am aware of somebody saying, well, I'm not doing that anymore, Val, because why should I? Which need to look at, but very pleased to see you've got a grant for it. Thank you.
But, yeah, I think you make an interesting point, and it's actually one of the other steps, and it is worth sort of referencing that one of active citizenship and the amount of volunteering we have in the county. It's an important point to reflect on. You know, people will volunteer to help build better communities, but they're not necessarily going to volunteer to deliver public services that other people are being paid for. And it's very important, as you raise it, to bear in mind that distinction. The River Simple hydrogen-powered car pilot, I am by no means an expert here. I put it for context. I mean, I think the one thing we can say around this, knowing that one of the challenges around transport is pollution, and also in terms of the number of cars we have on our road. I think it's an off-cited fact, actually, that people buy cars. We sort of buy cars as private individuals, and they spend 90% of their time parked in car parks or driveways. I think what's really interesting about what River Simple are doing in Abergavenny and their longer-term model, as I understand it, is obviously the first thing being they're hydrogen-powered. They don't pollute. They just give out water vapour rather than sort of noxious substances that harm the environment and harm people's health. But what they're doing in Abergavenny is enabling people in the community to trial and test these schemes, and their model is one of leasing. So rather than people owning vehicles, you simply lease the vehicle. So you, similar to many people do now with other things, but it opens the door, I think, to more things like community car share schemes, where people can share these costs in a local area and perhaps open up the cost of mobility to more people.
Can I just make a suggestion there, Matt? Because, you know, Councillor Smith and I had the opportunity to have a look at this installation. And all I can say is that, you know, we really need to promote ourselves a lot better. You know, there's a golden opportunity there where the bus station is to really tell people about this initiative. And yet we've got these, what look like empty garages. It's sort of a great big grey area with no information on it at all. And it really is just an eyesore. But if people knew what was really going on there, and we could encourage people. I mean, I'm real target market for one of these cars. I'd love to have an electric car or a hydrogen car. But, you know, we're not really promoting the idea very well. So I don't know whether that can be improved. And that whole area at the bus station, which is looking rather sad, we felt, didn't we? You know, empty, our information centre, which was empty, these hydrogen installations, and there's electric charging points there. Nothing to tell anybody what's going on there. So I think, you know, perhaps we need to look at how we can, you know, promote the idea and get people thinking about it, because I think we're missing an opportunity. Councillor Smith?
On that, Chairman, that we are missing an opportunity. That's a main point of arrival to what should be really good, really, and what are we confronted with? An empty building, walloping great construction in the middle. Did we ever clarify if planning permission was needed for it? Some not particularly good toilets. We should be looking at the whole thing totally. Yes, environmentally it drains well, it slopes down part of it. No, it's an area that's worthy of officers actually taking an interest in and doing something about it. What it is, we've got a not very attractive entrance to what should be a very, very good visit. The sort of visit that brings you back to Monmouthshire again. There's scope for a huge lot of improvement there, Chairman.
Totally, and you know, if we're doing these fantastic initiatives, let's tell people about it. Let's put some information on there, some boards or something, telling people about what this is all about and promoting the idea.
Okay, Chairman, thank you for letting me substitute this morning. I'm enjoying myself, because while we're talking about looking at the environment, we did that spectacular visit of our Monmouth Loos. That's something you'd enjoy doing, Mr. Rees. Rather sad in a way, because things hadn't improved since visits years and years ago. But on using a service station facility, toilet, I was amazed. They were advertising down their doors, we've spent a lot of money on these loos. We are saving water, we are saving electricity, these are far more hygienic. And we need to look at conservation of water now. I mean, all these sort of new thinkings, the new developments, we should be taking on board, thinking about. We can't afford to do them, but nevertheless, you have a plan that if the funding is ever there, we can do that. We can do something better to achieve an improvement in the environment. And certainly the use of water on that flushing system in the cisterns there was incredible. They must have been saving megabutts on their water bills as well as being a much better system. So, yeah, let's do something about Abergavenny. Perhaps you and I, Chairman, should have a walk round again.
Yes, I'd welcome that. So I think we're slightly straying away from the point, which was the hydrogen facility. But could you just comment a little bit on that facility, Matt?
I can't tell you an awful lot about it because I'm not an expert in it, but I think the point you make in terms of the questioning is absolutely valid. We have something there which is of UK, if not global, significance. We're incredibly fortunate as a county that River Simple have chosen to pilot their work here, and yet if the feeling is that isn't being promoted, that we're not enabling visitors and residents of the county to see that and to really learn about it, then we're missing an opportunity, and that's something I'll take away to colleagues that are working with River Simple on that one, because absolutely very valid point, really big and interesting project, and something we need to celebrate.
Councillor Trahan.
Thank you, Chair. There's an electric charging point at the Riverside Hotel in Monmouth. Is that council initiative? And if so, I've only noticed one sign, and that's on the side of the restaurant of the Riverside, saying there's an electric charging point. There's no promotion for it anywhere else, not even in local press or anything.
Thank you. If I could bring Hazel in here and then Matt. Thank you. Very good question.
We've recently completed a project under the Rural Development Plan called Fully Charged. So we had some funding through the RDP to put in 20 electric car charging points around the county in primarily kind of tourism type businesses. So hotels, golf clubs, caravan parks, that kind of thing. The backpackers in Chepstow, those sorts of places. So they were put in at no cost to those companies in return for them advertising them as part of their promotion, as a way of kind of seeing whether having an electric vehicle point increases their business. And so, for example, the Priory in Caerleon, because the RDP covers the rural bit of Newport as well, they've now got 3 charging points, and they're actually talking about building an extension to increase the amount of accommodation, because they've had such a large number of people who are staying there because they've got the electric vehicle charging point. Now, it's kind of been left to the businesses how they kind of promote their facility. So if it's like a hotel, generally I think they're not charging, but they're hoping, that it's their customers rather than a kind of public facility that's open to anyone. But they do vary how each of those 20 sites have chosen to manage them. So there's about to be a report published into kind of how well they've been used, how it's been, whether people have taken to them, whether they've had more business because of them. And those businesses have been offered the opportunity to keep them now at the end of the year trial, which I think the majority of them are. So I'd imagine that everyone has seen positive impacts to their business. And just in terms of the hydrogen thing, you won't have seen anyone using the hydrogen part yet, because we haven't got the vehicles yet from River Simple. We're expecting the first one, I think, any day now. But hydrogen power vehicles aren't on the road as a matter of course at the moment. And so until we've got the vehicles from River Simple, there won't be anyone using that. And there was talk, I don't know where it's gone or whether it's actually happened, but I know Gwent Energy, who installed the electric vehicle and hydrogen unit in Abergavenny, were talking about whether they could work with schools to do some sort of, artwork or interpretation or something on the unit. I haven't seen it to know what it looks like, but I know that was talked about. I don't know if that's definitely happening or not, but I imagine once it's fully operational, they would have to have more signage and explanation there than they do at the moment, because it's not actually quite in operation yet.
Okay, well, that all sounds, I mean, what's very obvious to all of us as members is that there's some excellent work going on, but we don't seem to be telling people about it. And I think, you know, we are missing opportunities. And if you were a company and you had to buy that space to promote something, you'd have to spend a lot of money doing that. And yet we've got places where we could be telling a story and planting the seed for the future and getting communities involved to promote these new ways of transport. And I think the message from members is, and really what Councillor Treharne is saying, is that you don't feel that point is really that visible to anybody. And we do need to have a check and balance on this, because on our toilet visit, we did visit a toilet where there was a charging point where you couldn't get a vehicle to it. So, you know, we do need to check that where we're putting these electrical points in, you can actually use them if you haven't got a tractor. Hazel.
Sorry, one other thing I thought of. Anyone with an electric vehicle would go online to use something called Zap Map, which is a website which plots all of the electric vehicle charging points in an area. So all those 20 I talked about, plus any others that we've got, are all on the Zap Map. So you might not, if you're just driving along a street, necessarily notice it. It might not jump out at you. But I think a user of an electric vehicle would have planned their journey, and they would have checked on Zap Map to see where their nearest charging point was. Because, you know, I think you've got to have that certain amount of organisation if you're driving an electric vehicle to know where you're going to be stopping and where you can charge up. So it might not, and I take your point that we probably should be doing more, like you say, to kind of promote the good things that we're doing, definitely. But people with electric vehicles will have looked and will know where those points are, even if we don't notice them yet.
That's a very fair point, but I think what we're talking about here is people that have got electric cars. Obviously, we don't need to promote them to them because they're signed up anyway. It's really promoting it to everybody else, and we're thinking about sustainability and the future. And I think that, you know, if we plant those seeds, people can see where they can. I mean, I've noticed them. There's some in Asda where I shop up in Bryn Mawr, and, you know, if I was to get an electric car, you know, I'm becoming more aware about where these points are. But it's really converting the people that aren't signed up to it yet, because obviously it's a good thing if we can promote this moving forward. Anyway, sorry, Matt, if you'd like to can carry on going through your list.
Okay, thank you. The final one on this page, and then I'm going to get into the GovTech work in a little more detail, is just to mention a couple of weeks back, or actually probably going back a little further than that, we've held some workshops with Wales Audit Office on this. It was an audit particularly of how the County Council is addressing the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act rather than the Public Service Board. But nonetheless, it's sort of given us some quite helpful feedback that we can take forward as we develop this step further. We haven't got a sort of final report on that for me to share with you yet, but we will have some feedback, and that sort of, as is the way with these things, goes through Audit Committee, but we'll also ensure that any relevant issues are fed back to this committee in terms of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So just to go into a little bit more detail on what we're doing with the GovTech Catalyst. So just a reminder, and I know you've had a members briefing on this sent around some time ago, but a reminder that we were successful in bidding for up to £1.25 million of Cabinet Office funding for what they term almost a sort of challenge approach to procurement, where we are dealing with a complex problem and there is no easy solution out there. So myself and Kath Fallon developed a proposal to seek companies to come up with solutions to a lack of rural transport and the associated loneliness. As you'll be aware by now, we were successful, and we've been working with 5 companies have been developing pilots over the last 3 months. The process kicked off in December, was launched by the leader and Councillor Sarah Jones out in Shire Hall. Those companies, and their names are on the screen there, have been sort of beavering away, talking to communities, building little prototypes, and trying to come up with the ideas that will help solve these challenges. So, what I'll just I'll come on to the timescales in a moment, but just thinking in terms of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and just to mention one of those ways of working, involvement. What's been great to see, these 5 companies there's one Welsh company amongst them, GPC Systems, based in Swansea. We've got some that are London-based, some up in Stratford. They've been coming down to Monmouthshire, spending time here, and to different degrees sort of immersing themselves. And what was that absolutely, sorry, that's a bit of an aside, but brilliant last week. One of the guys was presenting to us, and I said, "Oh, you're going back up to London now?" And he said, "No, my wife and children are coming down." So in the times I've been down here over the last 3 months, I've fallen in love with this place, and I'm bringing the family down on holiday next week. So that wonderful sort of introduction to our county for people who otherwise may not have been here. But as a bit of an aside, these are just some of the examples. So the firms have been out to the Access for All group. One of them has been out and met Trellick and Devorden Community Council. They've been out in Llanethy Hill, Gilwan and Clydach and spoken to people there. We've had firms out riding the grassroots buses for several days, talking to users. They've been out on community meals vans and met people on the doorstep to try and reach some of those people that may not get out and about from their houses. They've had discussions with Transport for Wales. And they've also been approaching people directly. So I know that one of the suppliers had 337 successful phone calls through to people that had used different transport services in Monmouthshire. So they're not doing this in isolation from ivory towers. They're getting out and about into our communities. As a PSB or as a council, we don't get involved in that level of detail. Where they ask for introductions, we make it. But really, these companies are left to develop these solutions and come up with proposals. Now, I think that's sort of, you can't see the detail of that on a screen, but it's just an example of something one of the companies has done. Now, this company is called Zip About Mobility. And what they've been developing is what they call it sounds very fancy, but a transport ecosystem. Back to that notion, that there are vehicles making the journeys that people want to make with spare capacity, but people don't always know about it. So if you're familiar, those that go to sort of large cities, we get used to the fact there are apps, there are signs on bus stops that give you live travel information. But coming to Monmouthshire, we don't have that sort of level of information about the transport that's happening. So these guys have been developing a platform that multiple transport providers could connect into to give people better information about buses, about the taxis that are there, about service routes, about trains. So all of the different transport options, but bespoke to Monmouthshire and the surrounding areas. So you can type in where you want to go. But very importantly for us, if you were using this or someone was using it on your behalf, such as our contact centre, if it was someone that wasn't using technology, you could also then say what your mobility restrictions are. So things like drop-downs to highlight, do you have access to a car? How far can you walk? And then develop more bespoke transport plans for people. One of the things one of the firms has done is hoover up a wealth of transport information. And some of this is limited to technology. So when I talk about hoovering up, it's where they go online and get a lot of data about the searches people are making for online about information. Now, we recognise that a lot of people, you won't search for a journey if you know it's not there. You don't type in to say, can I get a bus from A to B, if in reality you know that bus doesn't run. That's one of the limitations of that and the importance of the involvement where they've been going out and talking to people.
Can I just ask you something on that, Matt? Because, I mean, I'm really interested in this technology. And one of the things, we've had some meetings at the area committee with transport, the railway, Transport for Wales. And, acutely aware that we've got all these people every day that drive to the railway station and park their car. Is there any work being done on how we could join those people up and we could reduce those cars? I'm sure a lot of those people are coming from exactly the same places, doing the same journey every day, and there's one person in a car when there could be more. Because one of the big challenges we have is we've got the railway stations, but people are still getting in the motor car to get to them because of the lack of public transport.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, actually. And these are some of the things that are being explored, because one of the limitations of this is poor information around what people are doing. So one of the things the studies have looked to address is to try and identify those transport patterns, the journeys that people are making. And one of them has developed a map, and I think they have... I was wary of large numbers, but they said something like 300,000 data items they've gathered on people's transport habits in Monmouthshire. So that's the sort of thing that can only be done with technology, but it gives you that sense. Potentially then, we start to understand that multiple people are making the same journeys, and that gives the demand information that makes it worthwhile for transport providers to say, okay, there's that many people doing this journey. What can we provide? To pick up that particular example, there's a great case study, I'm not sure it's still running, but over in Bristol called Slide Bristol, where they did exactly that. They looked at demand for commuters who were making very regular journeys, and often the sort of people that wouldn't get on a traditional bus even if one were available. But they targeted them with a service called Slide Bristol that picks up those commuter journeys into the centre of Bristol and into Bristol Parkway Station to reduce private car journeys. And of course, the advantage of that sort of service is you can charge a market rate for it, as opposed to some of the other services which need a subsidy because we're aiming them at vulnerable groups. So, sorry.
Are there any other questions on that particular point before we move on? Can I just ask you what's being done with the taxis? Because, I mean, I've got 3 children. Only one of them has got a car, as it happens. They're all in their 20s. And the one that lives in Stratford in London, she uses this company now, which is in Amsterdam, Berlin and London, called, I think it's Veervan. And they don't actually use Uber anymore, young people in London. They're using Veervan because people can join the journey, and you only pay depending on how many people join, and you pick people up as you go along, which, sounds such a fantastic way of doing things. And this is advertised, so, you've got the app. And I'm sure this is something would be able to work in a rural community. For example, in my ward, Abergavenny Market on a Tuesday, if people were able to share that information, how many of you are going in the car or whatever there, so that other people could join and pay. Is this the sort of thing these groups are looking at?
Yes, I mean, the thinking isn't at that stage yet, but I'll come on to where we'll be going, because I guess one of the limitations we have in Monmouthshire is that of scale. Is it economically worthwhile for some of these providers to come in and provide the service? And that's really what the transport ecosystem is trying to do. For example, if one of these providers successfully develops a platform which multiple different providers can connect up to, it might be that we don't get one big player, but we might get lots of little providers that have the technology platform to enable them to do something similar for Monmouthshire residents. And I'll come on to some of the next stages, and this is a little sort of sensitive because we're still in a competitive process for this. So I have to be mindful that I can't say as much to you here in this forum as I would if we were chatting in the corridor around some of this. But last week we had presentations from the 5 companies. We're nearing the end of what we call phase 1 of this process. So we had 4 civil servants down from the Cabinet Office in London. They sat with us. Sharon's part of the panel as well. And we received presentations from the 5 companies in terms of what they've developed. So I'll just throw out a couple of things, and I'm afraid I can't go into too many specifics because it would be unfair on the companies who are all still in a competitive process with each other. That process comes to an end this week, but there will still be elements where it's part of their own sort of intellectual property and patents. So there are sort of limits to how much we can put out there. But also, there will be concerns around technology. Not everyone is online, not everyone has access to the internet, not everyone uses a smartphone. So some of the things being explored are smart speakers. We've seen a prototype where actually you can book a bus journey using a smart speaker. What people refer to, you hear it often mentioned in the news as machine learning, where actually the journey planner may prompt you. You normally go to the supermarket on a Tuesday. Do you want me to book you onto the grassroots bus? So the sorts of things that remind people, because we know that sometimes when people get lonely also they can fall out of the habits. And those prompts or nudges to activity can really help. And of course, remember as a county council, this is a PSB piece of work, but as a county council, any technology we develop or is developed that makes this more efficient is available to our staff. Be it a social worker working with a vulnerable adult or someone with a learning disability that's struggling to plan a journey, or the staff in the contact centre who currently spend around a quarter of their time dealing with grassroots bus bookings. So this technology, it may not be that everyone uses it immediately, but they might have an intermediary or an advocate that someone uses it on their behalf, but they will still benefit from it should it be successful. So we have these 5 different projects. They don't all have a strong transport focus because it was around loneliness and transport. But there is a strong transport focus in sort of 3 to 4 of those projects. And what I'd like to do is just sort of give you an indication of where next with this scheme, because I appreciate we're not giving you a lot of detail. I'm not showing you a prototype and saying this is it. And it's really important because this has been quite a strong development phase. And that's one of the things the Cabinet Office are looking to in this, is not people that have turned up with a ready-made product. Because if there was a ready-made product out there, we should have just bought it. The idea behind this GovTech Challenge is to solve problems to which there is no ready-made solution. And then the advantage being to those firms, if they can use Monmouthshire as a test bed, then they have the potential to build a product that they can sell and scale elsewhere. So it's their opportunity to build a business model, testing this in Monmouthshire. The advantage to us is we could be in at the early stage of something and we develop a relationship with that supplier. They will all have different models, from giving a product away free and making a profit from advertising through to charging for a service. There's a real mix of things there. But for all of them, their interest is in developing something that will give them a future as a company to grow the product and remain a viable business. So there are some dates here. I'm not sure if they're a little small to make out on the slide, but just to stress, these are sort of indicative dates. I know for fact this is moving back by about a week at the moment. So we had what we call the show and tell day last week with the suppliers, and a small number of us then spent the following day with them holed up in Mega, where they assessed us as a body as well and thought, are we worthwhile backing? Because at this point they've released 5 pots of £50,000. We're now at the stage, if there is something viable in these 5 pilots and we get the finished reports at the end of this week, they may release up to a further £1 million to fund 2 schemes with £500,000 each for a further 12 months, to take them from the sort of the lower level or prototypes and ideas we've seen at this stage to actually building them out and testing them in Monmouthshire. So we'll be assessing those in the coming weeks, and then all 5 of those suppliers, after hearing our feedback, will have the opportunity, if we are successful and if Cabinet Office release the further funding, to go through to phase 2. So they effectively have done a report and they will say, look, we're really interested in continuing this in in Monmouthshire. They'll have around 2 weeks from sort of around probably sort of 5th to 10th of April to submit their expressions of interest. We will then interview and assess those different companies as to whether they can generally move forward and produce something viable for stage 2, with a view to putting contracts in place towards the end of May, and then phase 2 starting. And phase 2 is 9 to 12 months. Up to now, the companies have worked for 3 months in Monmouthshire with £50,000 each. Phase 2 would be 9 to 12 months long, with them being able to draw down up to £500,000 each. And I have to stress of Cabinet Office funding. This isn't Monmouthshire PSB or Monmouthshire County Council funding. So it would be 2 companies moving forward. So yeah, it would be £500,000 each, or up to £500,000 each for 2 companies. So at that point, we'd have something to probably, you start to see something more concrete then as members. And we have something that we're able to talk about more proactively with communities, because we're through that first competitive stage. Now, some of the companies have already built sort of little demonstrators of things. They've taken them out now. I know Zip About was one of the slides I put out earlier. They've built a journey planner, and they've shared that through Monmouthshire's social media channels. They've gone out into different community groups and got them to test it and use it. So some of that activity is happening out there, but it's on quite a sort of small scale where they're testing things out. So that's the next stage for the GovTech Catalyst. Right now, we don't know if that is definitely going to solve our transport problem. I think we have to be honest enough to say this is a pretty significant and complex issue in a rural county with real issues in terms of transport deprivation. But the reality is we don't have a lot more money to throw at that problem, and we don't know what the right answers are to solve it. It's likely to be a combination of things. But what this does as a PSB and as a county council is give us the opportunity to get some different people, some innovative technology companies working on solutions for us that, if they prove viable and if they make a difference in the pilot phase, could longer term be adopted and help improve rural transport and loneliness here in Monmouthshire.
Thank you very much, Matt. And I mean, how fortunate we were to have such a brilliant team of officers that secured this funding, and we can now see how it's moving forward. And it's really exciting. And I think it just goes to show how Monmouthshire as a county and as a county council are innovative, and we're embracing new technology, and we're trying to find solutions, and it's really encouraging to see that. So I'm sure members have got questions on this transport. So can I ask members after that very interesting presentation by Matt if they've got any questions on rural transport and specifically this scheme and this initiative going forward with GovTech?
I haven't got any questions regarding that, but if I could very quickly say that there was a system operating somewhere in Britain, wasn't there, a tokens system that always struck me as having benefit to everybody, but tokens. What I wanted to know was car sharing, the insurance. It's something on my list to do, to check that if somebody is offering somebody a lift, does their insurance cover them? If I offered my neighbour a lift, does my insurance policy cover me for taking them to Cwmbran or wherever?
Can I come in on this? Because I used to work for Liverpool Victoria Insurance Company.
And also, the other little bit then, if I gave my neighbour a lift and said, OK, I'll have a £5 for giving you a lift, does that alter the insurance?
If you've got a private car insurance, you're not allowed to take money or reward to offer somebody a lift. I mean, you know, as far as covering you to take somebody in your car, you'd have to check with your individual insurance company, but certainly the policies that I was used to dealing with, that would have covered somebody to give somebody a lift. But obviously there can be exceptions to that, but you're not allowed to take money or reward that you are not insured, because obviously that would open the floodgates and you could have people operating illegal taxis, if you like. So would you agree with that, Matt?
Yes, that would be my understanding as well. It's where the reward happens. But also, bear in mind that people running the community car share scheme at bridges, for example, that's more formalised. They would also be getting advice on bridges, from bridges, in terms of anything they need to declare with their insurance company.
I'd appreciate being sent that information from bridges, because I have asked before and it's never arrived. So if you could organise that for me and I can pass it to somebody else, Matt, thank you.
Councillor Chahan, have you got any questions?
I have a concern about the city deal, that Monmouthshire will benefit somewhat from the city deal.
Are you staying for this afternoon, because we've got a seminar this afternoon on City Deal? I don't know whether Matt wants to answer that now, but obviously we're going to have a whole conversation about that later on. Yeah. But it is relevant. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's extremely relevant in this case, and obviously there'll be sort of further opportunities to discuss the City Deal with Kelly Byrne and others this afternoon. I think the potential for this, if there is one, and I'm a member of one of the working groups of the City Deal looking at data that's chaired by Alison Ward, Chief Executive of neighbouring Torfaen. And this work has been discussed there with the potential, could it exist, if successful in Monmouthshire, on a City Deal footprint. And I think if you were to look at it there, and that's really interesting in terms of sort of the regional aspect and taking it to scale and whether Monmouthshire will benefit. We know that there's been investment in, or there is investment in sort of heavy and light rail. That backbone infrastructure through the metro, I think is to the tune of 720 million of the 1.2 billion. Now, that infrastructure doesn't touch all pockets of the City Deal, and I think as Monmouthshire, we probably have more communities that are not touched by it than many of the other authorities in the City Deal. The potential of something like this, if it works, and I always have to qualify that with an if we can find someone that develops a technology-led solution that really helps connect that rural and isolated communities with better transport, that would be something that I think we would consider taking through to the City Deal Cabinet for investment, if it was felt that it was something that was viable. Because it's not just our leader in the shape of Peter Fox on that cabinet. There are other leaders who will, as a region, benefit from Metro and Metro Plus, but we will have those communities not touched by it. And if there is something that could work on a City Deal, then I couldn't speak for the regional cabinet, but I think it is something that we would certainly consider putting together a proposal for the City Deal around.
Does that answer your question? Can I ask you, Matt, about numbers? Do we know how many? We're talking about people that are isolated. I was at a coffee morning at Gilwan, run by Gilwan Roots, a few weeks ago, and there were some people there from Welsh Government doing surveys, and I actually said, well, actually, the people that you need to be surveying aren't here because they're the ones that can't get here. Do we actually have any figures on the number of people that are isolated out there and what our sort of target market is that we're trying to, target with these new products? What are the numbers that are involved?
Yeah, a number of the firms have been looking at that, and I wouldn't be able to quote a figure off the top of my head. Rich, I know you're involved. I don't know whether any spring to mind, but we haven't had the final reports through yet, so we'll have all of the evidence base there. Now, I know one of the providers showed us some research that highlighted extrapolating national data that in Monmouthshire we'd expect around 16,000 of our population to experience loneliness. Now, that's different from isolation because you can be connected and lonely. They've also been bringing together sort of different data sets to try and estimate this. But of course, the difficulty with those people that are not in our system is identifying them. But it was really pleasing to see, for example, one of these companies going out with the community meals vans and actually finding people that way, because these can be the people that are not getting out and about. They're not off our radar. As a county council, we're identifying and looking to meet their needs and keeping an eye on them, but they can still become quite isolated. But I couldn't put a figure at the moment, but in a couple of weeks' time, once we got the final reports in, I might have a little more information I can share with you.
Thank you, and I think that's encouraging. You know, it's also a question about giving these people dignity, because I know, you know, in my community, I give an elderly lady who uses the buses. She's got no transport, a lift whenever I can, but I'm very aware when I'm not able to give her a lift, she's not able to join in with those activities unless she tries to ask somebody else, and then she feels maybe that she's a burden. And I think it's also a question about giving these people, you know, some dignity back, that they can have their independence, and that they can, you know, find solutions that are going to help them to have that dignity, really, and, you know, when they are at home and they can't get out easily. Are there any other questions on the transport? I think it's really interesting. What involvement will members have when you've got down to the last two? I mean, how is there going to be any member involvement with that, or how are you going to communicate it to members?
We haven't planned out phase 2 at the moment yet, Chair, because we don't want to count our chickens until they sign the cheque, as it were. But I think at the very outset, we'll sort of share some information in terms of a written brief. We've previously given members a written brief. Now, depending then on who the successful companies are and how they plan to take it forward, I think we'd make a decision at that point, because we might get to that stage where it's really opportune to bring members together, either as an entirety or perhaps a small group, to sit alongside this work, particularly to keep an eye on some of the involvement aspects and where the community views are sort of feeding in, and whether, as we move from, you know, with the, I mean, £50,000 is a fortune, it's a lot of money, but in terms of these companies employing multiple people to work on it, we couldn't really dictate that much in phase 1 to say you must come here, you must talk to these people. I think the point at which you're talking the money we're talking now, it's a little easier for us to say, right, you know, we're holding a special select committee or a member seminar, please come and talk about the projects. A little harder to do in phase 1. I think as we move into phase 2, there's a lot more opportunity for us to bring members in and bring your experience to bear on helping shape this up through phase 2.
Okay, well, I'm sure members would join in me in wishing you every success in securing that £1 million, so that you can move forward with the two that are selected, and we really look forward to that. So, unless there's any other questions, I think really just summing up on that, we're very encouraged to hear where we're going with the GovTech scheme. Looking back on the other things we discussed, transport and using, you know, opportunities that we have as a council to do that, which we're currently missing, using the example of Abergavenny bus station. There was a concern made by Councillor Smith about the grassroots bus service and the difference between voluntary and paid drivers. And I think moving forward, you know, we're going to have more scrutiny. And once this has progressed, I would imagine we'll have a special scrutiny just on this very issue, looking at all the different modes of transport and how they all are going to fit in with each other as part of the wellbeing strategy. So I think we now have got to the point, I just really sum up, I think it's been a very interesting meeting. I think we're very grateful to Chris, and I'm very concerned that he's still here, and I'm we're very pleased that you have joined us for the second part. And I think it was a very interesting presentation that he gave, very far reaching with very broad issues that we're very aware of here. And I think really many aspects and questions were asked, but we do recognise that your organisation is changing. You're trying to deliver it in a better way, and we hope that we're able to meet the challenges that we've got facing us now, which are really very huge challenges, and that we can move forward. But we would like to see, I think all of us felt we wanted to see Natural Resources Wales. We recognise you've got limited resources, but more engagement with the local community, because we do really feel that people care and they would like to be part of this and do their bit. And that's certainly been my experience in my area and the initiatives that we've had locally. So I would just like to thank both Chris Rees from Natural Resources Wales for giving up his valuable time and coming to talk to us today, and also for Matt on his presentation and giving us an update on what's happening with the GovTech. I'll just pass over to Hazel now. Yes, now I'm going to. So we're going to have agenda item 6, which is an update on the regional wellbeing work. And if you want to make a move, Chris, please, thank you very much and safe journey. So, Richard, thank you waiting patiently at the back there for your item. So I'd like to invite you to give an update to members on the regional wellbeing work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very interesting morning's discussion. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to give you a brief update on where we are with... I nearly said good morning, so I just stopped myself. Looked at my clock as I went, and it certainly wasn't a hint, because it was a very interesting. So here to provide you, the committee, with a brief update about work being undertaken for public service boards at a Gwent regional level through the Gwent Strategic Wellbeing Assessment Officer Group, also abbreviated to GSWAG, utilising Welsh Government funding. And just a brief reminder, at its broadest terms, that the Welsh Government funding is for the 5 PSBs in Gwent to use it collaboratively to build on work completed as part of the wellbeing assessment and help build towards the development of wellbeing plans. Hopefully members of the committee are fairly familiar with these projects. We've brought a number of updates to you in the last 12-18 months or so. But I'll just briefly run you through activity that's been undertaken in 2018-19 and then give you a brief update of the proposals that have been submitted for the 2019-20 funding as well. So in terms of the 2018-19 projects, there's been further work on future trends. You recall, hopefully previously, we worked to progress a greater understanding of future trends that could impact on wellbeing and delivery of public services in Gwent. This has been built upon this year. We've held a regional conference in November, and also a local workshop for Monmouthshire specifically was held in Monmouth in December, which really developed that thinking at a more local level, directly relevant to the steps we have in our wellbeing plan here in Monmouthshire. And Councillor Turner, I know you attended that meeting with us and made a valuable contribution to it. And this really helped us, and particularly those step leads, have a greater understanding about the future trends that could impact on their steps. And the feedback has been provided to them now to inform their further development. For example, some of those future trends were raised in the 2 projects you talked about, I'll say earlier rather than this morning. Climate ready Gwent, again, that has been touched upon through the presentations earlier. There's work underway on that, and obviously Chris raised that as part of his presentations as well. I know Councillor Smith, you obviously attended a meeting, and Hazel, my colleague, has been involved. Hazel, is there anything you want to add further to what Chris has said this morning, or has Chris covered it? If that's okay, Chair? Yeah.
Not really, other than just one point. I know Councillor Smith was at the workshop in Monmouth last week, but I was concerned about the small numbers of members of the public there. But the first workshop, I think, was more broadly advertised, and they had about 40 members of the public in the first workshop. The second workshop, which you came to last week, was more targeting organisations and public bodies who work in that arena to look at, these are the things that the community have said, these are the things that the public have observed, the way climate is changing, how it's affecting their town. What, as public bodies, can we be doing better together to work with the community to address those going forwards? And the consultants are writing up that at the moment, and there'll be some recommendations for them for us to consider taking forward. But also, that's Monmouth, but also there's work going on in the Gwent Levels, and the kind of area that Newport have chosen to focus on is the Gwent Levels and the potential risks of flooding, and they're working with the drainage board down there and local farmers and things as well. And there's another separate project looking particularly at farming communities, of which Monmouthshire, will be a key part. So it's not just Monmouth focused. There's bits happening all around Gwent, many of which touch on Monmouthshire, or we can learn from the other areas.
Thanks, Hazel. And then the final project using the 1819 funding is it's a project that's specific to Monmouthshire around piloting use of data, and particularly looking at data dashboards. I say that's specific to Monmouthshire, but the learning will very much be shared back with colleagues as part of that GSWAG group. And the way we've approached that is obviously the wellbeing assessment, as you know, is a very comprehensive report that covers a range of data analysis and also views from our communities. So the dashboards are not looking to replace that. What it's looking to do is supplement that by looking at some of those key data items that were part of that assessment that were identified as particular issues for Monmouthshire, looking at ways how we can track the progress we're making against those. Not just in terms of maybe some plain reports, but actually looking at how we can visualise those to make them as engaging as possible for a range of audiences who want to look at them, and also make sure, as I said, they're up to date, and where possible we're looking to automatically update those so it requires less human input into keeping those issues up to date and tracking the progress made against those specific data items. So those are the main projects. Also, recall, mentioned in the report is the Happy Communities work we've undertaken. And some feedback for that will be featured in the forthcoming PSP Wellbeing Annual Report as well. So that's the 1819 work. In terms of the further allocation of funding that's been made for 2019-20, Appendix 1 to the report sets out the letter of offer and also the criteria there which the funding needs to comply to. A reiteration again, this is for Welsh Government funding for the 5 public service boards in Gwent to use collaboratively, building on their wellbeing assessments and wellbeing plans. This year, Monmouthshire is acting as the lead organisation for administrating that on behalf of the 5 Gwent PSBs. Each area has taken its turn, and this year it's Monmouthshire's turn to administer that in association with the Gwent Strategic Wellbeing Assessment Group. And officers on that group have been developing projects to utilise this funding for 1920. And there's 3 proposals that have been put forward to Welsh Government. These actually we haven't had formal approval for these yet. Obviously, when we'll let the committee know. So these are just proposed submissions at the moment. They aren't approved. So proposals rate to 3 main areas, and obviously take account of that criteria set out in the letter, which we need and right to abide to. So one is development of community future risk and opportunity registers, and which these can be used by PSBs to identify and mitigate longer term risks and also opportunities to communities, and also been to explore potential responses to those risks and opportunities. The second one is around developing new and innovative ways of reporting progress. So this year the Public Service Board will be for the first time producing an annual report on its progress so far against its wellbeing plan, and we're looking at opportunities, working collaboratively where possible to make that as engaging as possible to residents and also other interested parties in bringing some of those examples really to life. And the final project submitted is to learn from some of the work started in 2018-19, and one of those approaches will be the work we're doing around data dashboards to provide updated and accessible and visually appealing information that tracks progress against wellbeing assessments and also wellbeing plans as well. I say those projects are subject to Welsh Government approval, and obviously we'll keep the committee informed at the appropriate points throughout the year as activity progresses and some of the further detail really of those projects is defined and implemented as well. So that's the sort of broad update, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that update. Have members got any questions on any of those aspects that Richard's covered for us? Councillor Treharne, have you? Well, thank you very much for the update, Richard. I mean, it is starting to all fit into context, and certainly it'll be interesting to see the annual report, which, do we have that every year? Have we had that previously, or is that the first time we've had that?
This will be the first one under the Public Service Board's Wellbeing Plan since it's been formed, and that'll be an annual report going forward. The first one will be due by July, and you'll be receiving it as a committee at the appropriate meeting before then as well to scrutinise.
Thank you very much indeed. So if there are no questions, can I just thank you, Richard, very much for coming along and updating us. And we now need to move on to agenda item 7, which is to consider the Select Committee's forward work programme. So you've all obviously got a note of that, June 2019, and we're going to be prioritising the 6 steps, and we're going to have 2 more partners, which I think has been really helpful, especially today. It's been an example at this meeting how useful it's been to have people along, and it really does bring it alive. So beyond that, Hazel, do we have anything else on our forward programme?
I think, Chair, we're waiting for the PSB to confirm their dates so that we can align the select dates accordingly.
Thank you very much. So we've all got a note of the meeting in June and what we will be looking at. And as Hazel has just said, we're just waiting to confirm the date of the next meeting. So I think we've had a really interesting morning. I'd like to thank members and officers for their input today, and also for Wendy and Hazel for their help and assistance. And I think, considering that it was disappointing that we had such a low turnout of members on such critical and important issues, we still managed to have a good meeting this morning. So thank you all very much indeed. And the meeting is now closed.